Yeah, we decided, we just
Yeah,
spread
spread
out.
Bit lopsided.
Yep. Don't get too offended. Too wide. Yep. Yeah, that's it.
Of the fire, my favourite Vietnamese restaurant. No, kitchen fire. Oh, how depressing. Just a crack. Crack up when I came to South Jerusalem. Would have been if they didn't clean the grease trap. Yeah, how most bars in restaurants start, that they don't clean the grease trap. Oh, really? But
Oh, yeah, thanks, mate. So, cheers, mate.
I actually don't have much on.
Item 2 is the attendance. attendance record. I think we are all here, aren't we? There's no apologies, no motions to grant leave of absence, no leave of absence, and no non-attendance. Okay, item 3, are there any declarations of interest? No items to note. Then item 4, we've got the confirmation of minutes. So we've got the
sense of the, I suppose, the lower level of capitalisation of staff. So when we actually did the budget, there was one major project that we were planning on to actually have the staff undertake the works, and that's Clark Road. Whereas when it's actually gone out to tender, we've actually combined that all into one, and the contractor's actually doing that work. So that's essentially where a lot of that adjustments actually come from, and also so where we've tried to reallocate them to other capital works, but there will just be a potential shortfall at the end of the year, and that's it's not necessarily it was, I suppose, a planned decision, not necessarily it just happened.
Are there any other comments or questions? No?
Yes.
You're right.
So we're talking about the $194,000.
Yep.
Sorry, is that
Can you put it closer to your mouth because
Sorry.
people can't hear?
is that the $194,000?
So yes, yeah.
And so we did mention that there was a reduction in employee costs in some prior quarters, right? And this is sort of offsetting that. What is the quantum difference between the two?
194,000. So yeah.
Well, so we reflected the reduction in employee costs in some prior budgets, right? Which I assume will be carried forward to the start of this period. And is this
What do you mean we reflected it in prior budget? So essentially,
sorry.
so where we've known that there's a position that we would previously capitalise. So those are the ones that we've actually reflected in. So we reflect their salary, but then but this one here is more so in relation to the fact that from a budget perspective, we're not going to anticipate to actually capitalise all of the staff that we had previously identified that would actually work on a particular project. So that's where it's actually come through. Does that answer your question?
I think I could help here. I think Ben's, correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, is reflecting the previous times we all went up. It said we've made savings of $300,000 in wages. Now it's showing
When that
worsening
comes
at 194. So I just want to understand
Okay.
Where is the reduction in capital where we had the
how the two
employers
work
capitalised?
together.
Thinking about it, I wonder were they operating changes?
Yes.
Operating savings? Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And I've seen other comments saying capital budget, we're about 50% of the way through, and that could be contributing as well, right? That if the capital projects haven't completed as far, that then creates a staffing that haven't been.
During the year, yes, but we're actually forecasting the end of position. So essentially, and it depends on. So in relation to this is actually a project. Where we at the start of the year we sort of identified, or as we were going through the budget, we actually identified that we were going to use our own internal staff. So that's so this is a bit of a unique situation with regard to that as well, because of that situation, because of the change in the delivery of that particular project. But as Erin said, we don't necessarily, so when we budget for it, we don't necessarily budget as the capitalisation during the year either. So we sort of say, oh, okay, well, they're all there. They're all operating, and then at the end of the year, we just make that adjustment at the end of the year, because we'll actually have it, if you look at it on a month-by-month basis, all that capitalisation happens. The budget of what we capitalise our salaries is all in June, and then when we capitalise it's all in June as well. So it's sort of, yeah, it's a bit hard. We don't necessarily do it on a month-by-month basis, because it's really difficult then to work out from a program perspective. But as the program engineering team. They've just been redistributed, so they'll still get basically the capitalisation rate based on what they're budgeting for as well. It's just, this is in particular with the depot staff, where we would allocated some part of the civil team to do some capital works, which we're not going to be doing.
Okay, thank you.
Questions?
And this is going to come across like a dumb question, but I'm sort of trying to represent some of the questions we will probably get in the chamber, potentially, around staffing costs. If we've got $194,000 worth of employee costs that we're unable to capitalise at this point in time, does that mean we have, I'm going to put this simply, project management that doesn't have a project to manage? I know we're talking about civil team, but you understand the theme. We were otherwise hoping to capitalise this staffing cost. That didn't come to fruition, but we still have the staffing cost. Is the question. So, yeah, and that you know, I understand, but I'm just trying to, I guess, get to that simpler point where we catch back up, but then the ultimate layman will turn around and go, so do we have more stuff than we need because we don't have the projects? Of course the shaking of heads going on. I'm just trying to arm us so that when ultimately the question comes, we are showing they've been redistributed, but they're outside of the capitalisation opportunities, and these are the other things we're able to achieve in the meantime, but it's going to play catch up at this point in time. And I'm not necessarily against the idea of making sure that we're tracking those actuals. It's just a slight tweak on how we're reporting them, so I don't want to confuse the issue.
I wonder if you can give an example of, like, you know, Joe Blogs was allocated to a capital project which is X, and then realised that he was, you know, working on a renewal project which is not capitalised. Sort of, is there an example that you can give me a chance just to kind of take to the chamber? You know what I mean?
So through the chair, with this specific example, we might be able to explain it. In this way, we've had vacancies in our civil team, which meant that we didn't have the actual capacity to deliver the capital works project, so we've outsourced that to a contractor. As a result, those capitalisations can't occur. We've had staff working on operational outcomes such as maintenance as a result as well, and increased maintenance. We've had more maintenance in our southern areas due to other projects out of our control, developer projects, for example. We've had to put our roads crew on maintenance of Athol and Gordon Road instead of on capital projects because of the nature of what's going down in the southern area, and we can't capitalise that. So combining all that together in the civil team means that the civil team did not have capacity to deliver the capital projects of Clark Road, and we've outsourced that, so therefore a component of that capitalisation has been lost.
Can I ask a follow-up? So then the follow-up to then talks about unplanned maintenance and budget. We're now increasing that by 43,000 as well, but we've been able to. Am I like? Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not trying. I'm just trying to run it through, because if we're saying we didn't have the staff when we needed the staff for capitalised projects, so we've contracted that out, but we've been able to then backfill the roles to then carry out some unplanned maintenance side of things. But then I've got unplanned maintenance $43,000 over what we're expecting to do. I'm probably misreading it, but I'm just asking the questions that will flow through. I apologise.
It's okay. Yeah. Through the chair, if only it was that simple. The unplanned maintenance terminology isn't road maintenance and things, it's building and facility maintenance generally. And correct me if I'm wrong, Erin, but I reckon that's the caravan park works, that unplanned component, where we had to do $30-something thousand worth of works, 40,000, they're about there, thank you, worth of works at the caravan park, which as the landowner we had to do those works, which wasn't planned, so that's unplanned maintenance, and that hits that line. Roads and civils crew maintenance programs are different. They'll be captured in the allocation such as road renewal, road maintenance and those things. Unplanned maintenance is buildings, essentially.
And it's quite, you know, it's quite a challenge because you've got the accounting standards and you've got basic accounting standard states what you can capitalise, like which salaries you can include in the cost of an asset, which is beneficial to the council, and then which ones you can't. So it's just working out what you can capitalise and then depreciate over the life of the asset, and then what you have to expense, which so that confuses it to another, takes it to another level.
That's fair. I might able to speak to it. I know I've asked some questions, but if I can just speak. I guess the main thing that I would personally just watch out for is just how we get our messaging right, because we've been pretty consistent on what we've been doing staff mix and staff numbers wise, and really spruiking the savings that we've been able to get on some of that savings that we have mentioned in not superficial savings, and where we've been able to embed and maybe change roles and the like. If we don't get our messaging correct on this one, this will look like our staffing costs are actually over what we were hoping they would be, even though all the hard work that is going on behind the scenes of not just backfilling because of backfilling's sake. And then we could be accused of trying to make a correction, which we're not. I'm not doing that. But what I'm trying to do is have the conversation at this level, because I can see a over-expenditure of $194,000 on employee costs, raising some eyebrows because it's different to what we've communicated in the past. Absolutely understand there's a reason. We need to nail that reason in real layman's terms. Because we've gone back and forth, and I get it, but I also I'm not confident to explain it. That's a risk.
And noting on this point of staffing, looks like there's a human resources favourable line item as well, right? So
there's the overs and unders.
Yeah.
We just need we took it from this, we put it here, here's out.
So just making sure that it's clear for the non-accountants now. She is so caught up in the numbers that you forget that it could be interpreted differently. But I was going to say, with looking at the budget review, there's some really good work going on as well. Like, you know, you've got the one thing I liked was the centralising the legal budget, and I know it's increasing to decrease future costs, but that's I think that's a challenge across a lot of organisations, is that you can get different business units going to the lawyers for the same advice, and that can get your legal fees very high very quickly. So it's good to see that you are thinking about every spend, every dollar that's spent, and how that can be improved. So well done. Yep. And
can I ask about the Northern Adelaide Waste Management Authority? I know we talked last meeting about some further developments with them. Or sorry, you hinted at some discussions you had.
This is the waste open.
which page are you on?
Page 7, the 51 brand and negative adjustment.
In terms of the discussions, what we had the situation this year where in a situation in the year whereas if they'll make operating losses, they will then at the council and will come with a gap. In the current budget considerations, I think we've been much clearer as a group of councils that when the organisation sets their rate that they're going to charge the councils, because that's the figure we use to then work out the residents' contribution, that's the figure that we're going to pay. And the organisation
So essentially, I think that the share of the joint venture, which the $51,000 that you're querying, that will actually get reflected because essentially that's our equity accounting of it. So essentially that's our share of their of their operating result, which now because of the issues that they've been facing with regard to the new contract and that's how it's actually reduced. So essentially but that will come clearer in the confidential item when we actually talk about their budget review too, because that's actually based on budget review too.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? No, if not, we've got Office's recommendation that the Audit Risk Committee recommends Council adopts the FY26 third budget update, reporting and forecasting, an underlying operating surplus of 296,000, increase to the current surplus of 50,000, and a reduction to the capital works expenditure budget of 1.581 million. And we also adopt the budgeted uniform presentation of finances as contained within attachment 1. Do I have a mover? Christine, seconder. Ben, all in favour? Carried unanimously. All right. 6.2 is the Treasury Management Report, the mid-year update. Erin, do you want to talk to that?
Okay, so really this report is just a mid-year update. So we do our Treasury Management Report sort of for the financial year usually in November. So Audit and Risk Committee have asked us to also provide a mid-year report just following on some concerns about our ratios that we had compared to our policy. So I'm happy to take this report as read, but take any questions unless Sharon or Chris wants to add anything.
Yes. If I may. Let me just with this one, obviously it's noting rebalancing. Sharon and I have been having detailed conversations about as our financial position strengthens, we need to progressively turn our cash advance facilities into credit policy positions so that it creates a hard discipline or a principle. At the minute there's a risk that we just rely on cash advances and whilst so to stop you paying chunks off them, the discipline's not quite there. So we've got to embed that into our operating cost. Because until you lock it in as a principal interest line, you don't have that in your budget. So I just want to flag that as our cash advance facilities come due, a number of them will come due at different time frames, we're going to do an assessment on whether there's an opportunity to transfer that over. But we've got to bear in mind, we're still fledgling in terms of cash flow, but that's where our mindset is at.
Just add to that, and so essentially what we're actually doing is working on a debt strategy that will basically take into account the things that Chris has raised about how we can actually then transfer to those traditional loan facilities. So probably at the July meeting, or maybe October, depending on how things go, we'll probably present that report to the Audit Committee as well, as to sit there and say, okay, well this is how we think that what we should actually be doing, as Chris says, as when we have our CAD facilities fall due, what do we actually replace them with? And it still obviously depends at this point in time as to what the interest rates are, because obviously while we ideally might want to switch to those facilities, to do it at this point in time is that we're actually probably going to be burdening ourselves with high interest rates for a long period of time. So we'll just be monitoring those situations with the interest rate as well as we actually go through that process, because we can going up, we can still fix some of the cap facilities and still just pay the interest just to minimise that impact on the interest rates that we're actually paying to make sure that that weighted average cost of our debt doesn't get too high by just taking the cash rate. So that'll probably come back July or October.
And I think it's important, I mean, history behind this is that, well, at the moment, 6 monthly is a good idea, have the updates, because, you know, the economy is so volatile. And this all sort of eventuated, to show how long I've been on the audit committee for, so you can see the convertible cash advance facilities taken out in 2018, 2019 and 2020 for fixed rates for 10 years. Now, during COVID, when the interest rates were 0, the council was locked into these facilities at 5%. So they don't look, you know, as extreme now because interest rates have gone up. But during COVID, when we were 0, that's we all got a bit worried and realised that, you know, you need to have a balanced approach to treasury, and also we're not in the business of being speculative. So you've got to make sure that you have a balanced fund. You know, you might, you know, you see organisations that, you know, might have a big share portfolio and thinking, okay, sell, we need to get out of it. But it's just, you've got to just continue on as is, even if the economy is really volatile, because you're not there to make money off your investments. They're there, you know, as security. And you just got to make sure you keep that in mind against the treasury policy. Any other questions or comments? Yep, David?
Yeah, so just on that strategy, you're describing a new facility that's not listed in here currently, right? Because we've got the convertible cash advance and cash advance extension. Yep, that's correct.
It's probably a bit of terminology, so it's just converting it to a stock standard principal and interest loan,
Yep.
you know, as opposed to having just that interest only loan and that traditional loan product, which I think we did have, but then the position changed for whatever reason, I don't know why. But yeah, now it's just starting to rebalance back to that and making sure that, as Chris said, that we're actually quite disciplined with our operating cash as well, but also I think it is that discipline to sit there and say, from a council perspective, is to sit there and say when we start getting surpluses, the purpose of the surplus is to actually meet that repayment level of what we're actually for a principal repayment debt reduction. That's the purpose of the surplus and what we're trying to actually get to the surplus. We're not trying to get to the surplus just to create a war chest. It is to sit there and say so we can actually have that discipline to reduce that debt rather than having that debt fluctuate between a, you know, $20 million facility and a $24 million facility and all that sort of stuff as well. So.
Medium term, we think rates are going to increase, and it sounds like you're bringing a paper looking at next board meeting for a strategy. And when would you be looking to sort of action that?
So we will probably we're working on strategy now. So whether it's the July meeting or the October meeting.
Yep.
Again, depending on what happens with the interest rate. So, you know, at the moment, the anticipated increases are already built into the long-term rates.
Yep.
So I suppose it is going to be that bit of a judgment call on working with LGFA to sit there and say, actually, you know, what do you think from a forward perspective? Are we still, you know, and it might actually just be small amounts in the first instance, like, I don't think that the strategy would be to sit there and say, you know, like currently we've got $11 million fixed at, on a fixed convertible cap facility. We might just do little chunks to sit there and say, actually, in the first instance, because we still see interest rates are high, we don't think that some of those interest rates are getting embedded in. If we actually convert it and we have to refix it at a cash convertible rate, maybe we might, be better off from a financial perspective, saying taking, you know, report process happening as well, and from I suppose from a council perspective, it's you sort of have this false sense that when you have a CAD facility and a limit on a CAD facility, the funds are always there. And it's trying to get that discipline to sit there and say, actually no, if you want the funds always to be there, we have to actually look at how we actually create those operating surpluses, because we have to actually be able to pay it back. So yeah, so it's just that different mindset.
So the officer's recommendation that the Audit Risk Committee receives the notes of the Treasury Management Update Report. Do I have a mover? Ben, seconder, Christine, all in favour? Carried unanimously. All right, 6.3 is the policy review of, I think it's 5, no, hang on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Obviously, it's more than it is.
A lot of work has gone into this. Do we have a speaker? Susie, do you want to speak to this, and then we can go through one by one?
Thank you. Through the chair, I won't add too much. There's quite extensive comment on most of them. I think probably the most important thing to know is I have been through the review schedule with that different approach, looking at removing rather than trying to spread the different areas of policy across the organisation out so that no staff had a larger load compared to other areas, changing the approach so that the policies that are either outdated in terms of the practice and processes that they and council's position in relation to matters are revoked sooner rather than later, so that that outdated information that we may have in those that we're not following, or it's not current practice or best practice, and we don't need those documents anymore. We can get those revoked and off the website sooner rather than later.
Well done. Are there any comments or questions?
Sorry, are you asking for individual policy?
Yeah, I think if
Okay.
how does do it, I think if we just, I'll take them all as read, and then if you wanted we can just do comments and questions, just sort of specify which one you want to.
Only two.
Yep.
So first one is the safe environment policy. It talks in there about if you want to take an image of a child, you need to get both parent and the child's consent. I'm just wondering if the parent's consent is in writing, and if it's not, how do you cover yourself against the risk of you thought you had consent, but the parent said they didn't consent?
Through the chair, yes, talent release forms, we call them, are in writing and it's written signature. The only time that doesn't apply is in large group settings, and I'll give an example, is our Christmas event that we do here, Santa's Workshop, but we have notifications on the entrances to that event saying if you do not wish photographs to be taken of your child, please come and see us, and we go through, and that by condition of entry is they're permitting it, and they have tickets to that event, so that's the written consent, so to speak. Outside that, it is, yes, physically written talent releases.
Okay, good.
And that would be sort of what children that are in the annual report, like, I'm trying
Correct.
to think that
Those sorts of
you only have
images.
a few, like,
Yeah.
social media or something.
Occasionally in social media as well, if we're promoting an activity or a program, those sorts of things. Yeah, it's limited use in terms of publication, 100%, but yes, it's all written.
Okay. And again, on the safe environment policy, I read in there that you do a working with children check every 5 years. Other organisations I'm involved with would do checks every 2 to 3 years, so I'm just wondering why you chose such a long period between
So
checks.
through the chair, it's based on DHS period of validation is 5 years. So the Department of Human Services say all working with children checks are valid for 5 years. So we're just going based on the state government's guidelines in that place.
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, Sharon from HR Speed, I think national police clearances we do more regularly in that space. I think they're only 3 years from memory, but working with children is definitely a 5-year horizon based on Department of Human Services. Yep.
So that's complying with the rules. I guess my next question is, are you comfortable doing it every 5 years?
We generally are, yes, 100%. If we have cause, we can request to go again. If we think there might have been an incident or we've become aware of something, then we can. But we're also very conscious of anyone onboarding will actually get a refreshed one.
Yeah.
So whilst they might have had it 4 years ago, we ask for an updated version when they're onboarded. So the 5 years is generally only those who are existing staff members continuing. Anyone new, it's a new one.
Okay.
And I can vouch, DHS is pretty good, like you get the text message
Yeah.
it's coming up to expire.
The reminder.
And if you can't remember doing it 5 years ago.
Also, this is the DCSI clearances.
Yep.
Yeah. So the systems that came into place as well, them being monitored too. So people have to do the 5 years, but if there's an incident within a notable incident, it is automatically notified through where it's all registered, etc. So where they were able to, they did it with the aged care sector as well. So they were able to stretch out the duration. So employees and employers are constantly trying to update, but the monitoring comes through the DCSI, so if there is an incident, it's operated within real time. That's how it's supposed to work.
You've got to get the balance, don't you?
Absolutely.
You're doing it
Yeah.
too often because it's cost and time,
Yeah.
all of that. Can I move on to the artificial intelligence one now? My only question on that one is, how are you going to monitor compliance? One of the reasons is, I think it's APRA's just published something, this is more for the banking industry, saying that just having a policy is not enough, that they've got to actively show that they're monitoring compliance. And you might not be up to that bit yet, but I'm just wondering, how do you monitor that?
That is a good question, and I think that there's some things that we can actually do, I suppose, on our own, like on council-owned devices. So obviously we have monitoring software, and we can actually even with our like our mobile phones and that, we can actually put them within a network that we can actually control what is an acceptable app that can actually be downloaded onto the phone as well. So that is probably the first immediate thing that we'll actually do, is to sit there and say, so we'll have that central management. Some people will find it a bit restrictive, but essentially it's still a work phone. It's if you don't want that restriction, use your own phone type stuff. So I think that the central management of what's actually an acceptable app, because most of these are apps, in relation to just people just generally going on using council devices and all that sort of stuff, it is a bit difficult. We can ban particular websites access through our firewalls and other security ways, but again, I think it's just something that is going to have to be, again, that education about what's acceptable, what's an acceptable use, and that identification of the risks, and then making sure, I suppose, if there is someone that's actually used it inappropriately or used that, we have to actually address that. And I know that that's actually the after, but I think, again, as we start using AI, that's until it becomes a bit of a way of life. I think that they're two combinations of that, of using that sort of stuff as well. So it is a very difficult
I know.
space
The question,
but yeah, so we can do some systems type stuff, but then it's education and monitoring and relying on people to do the right thing. Unfortunately, which we do for a lot of things anyway.
I'm just going to share my perspective on that thought about how do you staff compliance. Before we had the policy,
obviously, as an industry, we've been doing things like through Legitza and all that, setting those guidelines, but as part of the development of the policy, we actually did go out to survey staff about their thoughts of using AI and all that sort of stuff, which came up quite interesting, as to sit there and say there's still a lot of people out there and in our workforce that sort of are still sceptical of using AI as well. So which is probably a good and a bad thing, because then actually that, I suppose, that provides us opportunity to provide get that better understanding, that better training and all that sort of stuff, rather than everyone saying, yeah, I'm going for it, and then having to try and bring it back when it's not acceptable. So from a workforce perspective, it's probably a good thing that there is a high degree of scepticism of utilising it, and again, a lot of people just don't understand how they can utilise it to actually help them.
I don't know how much you guys have used it, but it's actually amazing. The things that it can do. And people should be encouraged to use it, because it can save a whole lot of time. The biggest risk is because it's open to the world, it's putting in, that was covered, I had a look at that in the policies, to make sure that confidential information is not put out into AI, because then it's accessible by everyone. The other way to think of that is the levels of employee that you allow. Like, if you think of, I suppose I'm trying to think of it in a non-defence way, but clearance levels, like, where if it's confidential information, then, you'd expect sort of just an executive level would have knowledge of it, and maybe then looking at the restrictions as to the availability of the information in the first place. So therefore, it reduces the risk of that information going out, because it's being handled by appropriate levels of employee. So, that's just the flip side. So then if there's a risk of people not knowing what's confidential and what's not confidential, they don't have the very sensitive information anyway. So if it did go out, and the thing with council as well is that the detail in the annual report and the budget reviews, and a lot of it is very
Public,
I don't think there's a whole lot of confidential information, so it is, if anything is confidential, just making sure that's locked down to an appropriate level. I think that will help reduce that risk. If that makes sense.
And just to clarify, so this is authorising staff members to use AI tools that are not managed by the council organisation.
I probably wouldn't go that far. It's probably our first step, in the sense of it's a acknowledgement that people are using AI tools, that essentially, so as a council, the only thing that we actually have is Copilot, but we know that there are people using Chat GPT, and we know that there's probably people using Claude and that sort of stuff out there. But as a council, we're actually not using, we haven't bought any subscriptions. So I think it's this thing of the policy is the first step in the acknowledgement that people are using this, and we're not sort of saying you can't use it, but we're just sitting there saying, actually, if you are using it and you're using it for work purposes, you just need to be aware and cognizant of this is the sort of framework that's acceptable from our point of view, and when you're actually using work data. I think as we get through, I suppose as we get more understanding of how we can use AI, and looking at all the, it's that thing about the fact that there's a new AI bot or chat or agent or something that comes out every day. It is that thing about understanding, and then when we actually work out at what point do we sit there and say, actually, we want an enterprise solution, and that's what's accepted versus, I think we would be, it's ignorant of us to sit there and think that people aren't using it, and previously they're using it, and we've sort of given them a bit of guidelines, but now we've actually just formalised those guidelines. So
it's also coinciding with me putting it to the organisation to look for opportunities about how we can utilise this for business efficiencies, cost savings, better outcomes for the community. So if I'm asking that, I need something in place.
Yeah.
To navigate through.
And that is actually consistent, right? Because you've said in here that any information that's not publicly available is not able to go into the tools you've described. And I mean, you are describing here the tools that people are bringing from themselves. You mentioned just then that you do have Copilot, right? Which is the Microsoft solution, and presumably you guys are a Microsoft house. Yeah. And so like that's not really reflected in here. And it's almost like if they're using the tool that is managed by the organisation at Gawler, then there might be different rules for that or a different security posture. Of Copilot. And if you've got the green tick in the top right, then the same restrictions that apply to your email, or like the same data governance that applies to your email, also applies to that chat. And so maybe for the next iteration, there is the opportunity to say, there's the posture and the policy applying to publicly facing accounts, and there's the posture that we're going to apply to the managed account. And then that's whether you have the subscription for Copilot, right, for the upgrade or for the basic. So.
yeah. And I think that's one of the things that, like, so at this point in time we are, having that basic subscriptions, and now it's that question about, okay, well, what do we do to actually enhance those subscriptions? Because obviously, even though it saves time, I was listening to a podcast that some people are really getting into the AI thing, and then they get the bill and they go, oh shit, it would have been easy, it should have been cheaper to actually get a staff member as well. So I suppose it is that those sorts of things as we actually get further and further, or get more, I suppose, more sophisticated in our application and use of AI, and looking at those opportunities that we actually do have or could have available to us from that analysis.
And sorry if I can just lead on from that. So I think the key is you've got to offer people the safest way of doing things, right?
Yeah.
And I think if you make it clear that that tool is the safest way to do things, if people are going to look at, use some input some information into it, then they might choose to, if they are diligent, might choose to use that method.
Yeah.
If I can add one more thing, I think there's another threat that AI poses that is not called out here, but that is the potential bias, right? And I think particularly for council, if you're dealing with, and I know this sort of doesn't say to rely on it, but if it's developing a policy or developing thoughts, right, there is often inherent bias, and you really have to be cognizant of that fact and trying to look past it. And so you called out a couple of threats in here, and that might be useful for that.
Any other questions or comments on any of the policies, measures?
I just had a more general comment. It's good that we are reviewing. There is a big body of work here. I think I've said this before. It's interesting to see the policies. I mean, to me, they're fine, but it's always when they're tested that we understand how they work. And typically, that's when we're getting accused of breaching our policy or blah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll work through that one, and I'll chuck ChatGPT in there to give me a polite response and edit my first one. But I'm just looking through on page 107. Susie's gracefully done us that policy review schedule, which actually came up in a conversation earlier today in another meeting I was at. This one here, just correct me if I'm wrong, the black spots that are filled out, they are complete or obsolete?
Through the chair, no, so that indicates the black shading, it indicates a document is to go direct to the council meeting indicated in that column. documents that will be recommended to revoke. That's why they're a little bit more, there's a few more numbers. And then given we do enter a caretaker period in the lead up to the election, the ones that are left really that were overdue for review, some are again to be revoked or to be combined, that they're scheduled for the 7th of July audit and risk meeting, and that means that therefore there's I've put one down for potentially the meeting in November, which is during the election period. So I've got another spreadsheet that is on the intranet for staff to reference, and that lists the policy documents and the direction that was agreed through the executive management team meeting and reviewing each of the documents within their area, those to be revoked or to be combined or to just be reviewed and updated in their current format.
So just on that, I find that the document really helpful to a degree, but is there a way that maybe we can combine what you guys are working with this, because this is quite visual to see and understand, but there's maybe just a couple of last little key bits that we could provide elected members, or we already probably have to a degree. It's just funny this actually came up in conversation in another meeting where we can clearly articulate where we're at with our policy reviews in a visual, and where we're hoping to get to. I know we've talked in the past where it's like, look, we'd like to be further along, but we've also done a lot of work in a short amount of time, and I credit to you for the work. I guess it's just trying to visualise it for elected members that might say our policies are lagging because they're all due for update. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can look at using different sort of colours to in this rather than just which meeting a policy might be going to, and I can liaise with Sharon and Chris if they've got any preferences to make it a more, I guess, visual document. There was a little bit of thinking behind the reasoning initially to just mark them in this document, and that was because I guess there was some areas where potentially the view was, no, this policy is not needed in this format, or this policy, it can become an internal document. It doesn't need to be necessarily a larger document, and that's adopted by council. And so there was initially some thought while we were going through that, sort of working through that process as to which policies and what their pathway looked like is probably the way of explaining it. I didn't want to cause angst amongst staff. It sounds a bit strange, but in terms of, I guess, having some of their policies in place, some people feel very strongly that they need their document to be adopted by council and things like that. I was trying to sort of limit and leave it at that higher level for the executive team to work through, which is why I hadn't put that level of detail in previously, but I absolutely can look to see how I can make it more visual as to where we're at.
Yeah, no, and again, it might sound petty, it's just arms people like myself to say, well, what are the policies up to? Cool, no worries, here, look at this. I don't even need to explain it after that.
If I may also follow on, you'll see in the information reports that there's more of a checklist style for the compliance update. Now that I think there's still some refinement that can be made in that, and the policy area is potentially one aspect where I could look at picking up the comments you've just raised in relation to this schedule document. There might be some ways I can enhance the reporting in that section as well, with numbers and so you've got those tangible figures. It is a moving document in that, as time goes on, we're addressing policies, but there might be more that are coming due for update as we move along as well.
And I think when I've been in the discussions and when we're having those discussions, the acceptance of being able to pivot has also been greatly respected, because sometimes we do have to change our business or what we're focused on. Land management was one of those ones where I think we turned around and said, hey, there's an opportunity here. maybe we prioritise, and I think that worked out for the better, potentially. But yeah, anyway, please don't spend too long. I was just just an observation, not a criticism.
Can I just ask for a point of clarification?
Mm-hmm.
So are you, when you say a visual for council, is it more in the context of where are we with regard to the percentage of our policies that are overdue? Is that more the question as opposed to...
Yeah, so...
Because it, is that the issue, or is it just the fact of, yes, we're checking them off? Because
yeah,
I suppose it's a different
yeah,
thing.
I completely appreciate it, and certainly not an issue, more an observation, so that we can... we have been talking about the policy reviews in general, and we've identified a vast list of things that are out of date and due for review. But I guess it's just clearly articulated, because it's not just a small list, and there's priorities that we need to focus on, and other ones where you go, look, it's out of date, has been out of date since 2018 potentially, but it's not hurting us to a degree, so it might fall a little bit down the priority list. That's what I like about the review schedule, and we've actually looked through that, and we've actually said, yes, we need to do this body of work, we're going to prioritise it like this, and then we also like the fact that we're looking at opportunities to go, that was lower down, but if we elevate that, it might open up another opportunity, or something happens and tests our policy, so then it reviews quicker. So we get all that, but I think it's more about the checklist clearly articulating the ones that we identified that need to be reviewed, and then the current priority order that they're going, when we're hoping they're going to be reviewed, and if we've got some slippage that we're trying to manage.
I think it's, I think, having been on the journey with council, like if you had a list of, normally you have a list of policies and procedures, and they have to be reviewed on a 3-yearly basis and signed off. But what has happened in Gore is that there's a whole new policy framework. So Susie's gone through and she's had got that understanding of all the policies,
Definitely.
and then she's worked out, okay, so which ones can be combined, which ones can be, revoked, which ones do we need, where is there a gap? And I've been through this process at an organisation, so it's a lot of work to work out, okay, we're missing a policy in this area, who's got 1 million policies, who's not a policy owner of any policies, and so Susie's done all that, and now it's a matter of going through all the policies and reviewing them, rewriting them, or creating them, and then getting them reviewed by council, audit and risk committee, and then up to council. So I think sort of there's got to be appreciation of sort of the journey, like it's not a matter of the tick the box exercise. So in a long-winded way, what I'm trying to say is that there's a whole lot of steps before you get to the schedule. But then maybe, Susie, if you colour code it a little bit, I have a think about it, because it is evolving and it's going to get better and better and better.
Yeah.
But you could do a box for policy to be revoked, policy to be completely created, policy to be, just minor amendments, complete rewrite, so they can sort of understand what you're having to do for each of the policies, because it's not just a let's read it, let's do a few formatting changes and push it through.
Absolutely, and not to take away from the body of work that this is, and I think the organisation going through this journey is going to be better for it more generally. And I'm more than happy to take it offline, because again, this isn't an issue, this is merely an observation, so that we can turn around and go, here's an A3 sheet, because this is really good, but if it just told a bit more of the story, it'd be a really useful tool, and you wouldn't need me on audit and risk. I could just say, please refer to, and then we play on.
And this is your problem, Susie, is that you're doing too good a job because you actually have a schedule. So many organisations don't have a list of policies.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, the framework and the appetite to combine and all that is quality improvement 101. Like, credit to you again. And it is just about articulating that through in a way that we can show someone clearly and quickly. Yeah.
Any other comments or questions?
Just
So what I've done is I've picked out the ones that have some fairly solid reasoning to revoke. It's not necessarily ones that have been through any major review. So policies, I'll pick one out. So I think planning area, I can't remember, I'm just having a look, so many clients are not reading this. A4 printout. So the library service, for example, is one in, sits under the manager of libraries and community services. We reviewed that, David and myself, and there's already some other documentation that the library users agreement when they sign on.
No, the question was, is that going to go to council?
To revoke.
To revoke, yes.
That's fine. That's
Yep.
fine.
So I've tried to group the ones to be revoked.
And we need to get through these, but I'm just conscious, because the intent from tonight's reports is that they would go to the 26th of May council meeting, is that correct?
Correct, so they'll go through the minutes process. We'll attach the minutes from this meeting and for the recommendations to be adopted by council.
We need to get through them, it's going to be a heavy policy agenda. Help council through that.
Maybe counting colours.
I think it depends on, like, I get what you're saying about the fact that there appears to be a lot of policy there, but and maybe this is the question is to sit there and say, yes, we're putting it to the library service, and I don't know, I'm just using this as an example, so that library service, it might be going to be revoked, or the dog registrations like to be revoked. So while it's a lot of policy from a council perspective, so I think that's probably just one of the things as to sit there and say, okay, well to say, oh, okay, well we can't have all those policies going direct to council because that's just going to bombard them. It is that thing about are they policies to be revoked or are they policies to be reviewed or new, which will make that judgment call as to how many we actually call forward. We won't do what Christine's thing of having a meeting and having an agenda that's 800 pages long because of that. So yeah, I think it's just...
a committee member, not the author.
Well, no, that's right. But yeah, so I think it's just more about what on the schedule, the recommendation, is it for review, update, new, revoke type stuff. So I think that's just something that we probably just need to clarify.
Yeah, that just raises a simple question. So because it's black, it doesn't mean it's getting voted automatically.
No. However, I guess the ones, what I have tried to do is group the policies to be revoked as soon as the ones that don't need to come via the Audit and Risk Committee, so they don't fit within the remit, as soon as possible to get them off of the website.
No, totally understand.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of getting back to Mayor James's point that this thing's got to make a bit of sense.
Yeah.
Because you just said that the black ones mean it's going to be revoked, but it doesn't mean
No. They're scheduled to be considered at that particular meeting, so I just shaded it to say it's going direct to council on that date, and then there's a secondary spreadsheet that staff refer to for the policies that is colour coded, which is why I suggested colour coding might be a way, that says, okay, we know the library service is going to be revoked, we know that the rural greenbelt policy is another one to be revoked. So I was thinking I could transpose those colour codes into the solid colours that indicate when they're scheduled and what the recommendation is.
that makes sense. Thank you for the clarification.
Also, to be clear for the independent members too, we've had information briefings on policies as well, so if we do get a chunk, the team have been really good to say, hey, let's pull elected members in, we'll run through these policies, anything that stands up, please look at track changes, etc., etc., etc. And again, I fall back onto we find out when they don't work, not when they do work.
Yeah, exactly.
But it does give the feedback is about just making sure that snapshot of the journey is clear to understand for those that don't live and breathe policy. Yep. But thanks, Susie.
All right, if there's no more questions,
question on the strategic risk register. I didn't write down the page number, but anyway, I was just comparing the risk appetite to the residual risk rating, and the only one was the heritage category. The risk appetite's low, but the residual risk rating was medium. So I'm just wondering if it's possible to get it within risk tolerance with further treatments, or is that as good as you can get? Sorry, I didn't write down the page number. It's in
It's
the
on page 149.
Printed off the strategic risk register. I've got it in A3 and I've shrunk all the margins so you guys might be able to read it easier than the agenda.
page 149.
Come prepared.
You should have led with this.
Oh.
I know, I already forgot to say it. I was talking and then I'm like, we'll see if anyone else. Sorry guys.
Yeah, this is his. I've already got this. I'm like, hang on a minute. I've seen this.
I tried my best to fit it all on one page and literally reduce the margins. So he's looking
The
at
heritage one.
the query around strategic risk number 7 with heritage. So the inherent rating for this is high with no controls in place. Now we have our controls that we've identified. Now we've indicated those controls are partially effective, which is leaving us with a residual risk rating of medium, which is outside of our appetite level. The reason why that has occurred is some of the controls are new. They're still in their infancy, they've still been only just developed. So we weren't able to rate that as majority effective or fully effective as the controls are new. Open Space Asset Management Plan is 2024. Within that, there are multiple actions that we need to do to then tighten that control. So what you'll find is, and when we rolled this out 3 years ago, we actually had 4 or 5 things that were medium. Some of them were in the finance world. Now over time, the exec have been working on those controls. Also the asset management plan. So those controls are now being followed. The actions that were documented within those plans have now been put in place. Therefore, the control rating is now stronger. So that is why at the moment some of these are either older controls, like the arts and cultural strategy encompassing the Gawler Arts strategy, that is 2016. Also at the moment we are reviewing our reconciliation plan. So some of the controls will be very new or in progress at the moment, some are old, but what we've found is over the next 6 months to a year, those controls will get tightened and will be more reassured.
Just to add to that, and I'll use the internal controls as an example. So obviously what we're actually also in the process of doing as well is that, so for our financial internal controls, we actually use Control Track to actually do those assessments. We're in the process of actually, and unfortunately with risk, it's always a moving target. So we sort of sit there and think that we've got it, and then we have to go and make some changes. So ultimately, and with the internal controls from a financial perspective, because it's actually electronic, and that's the plan to actually do these assessments in here, if we did this in Control Track, but partially effective, it would actually create a thing that we'd actually have to do an action plan to sit there and say, actually, what are we going to do on this risk to actually bring it back into that. So I think that that's where, you know, it's still in a bit of its infancy because we haven't necessarily got the tool, because obviously there's, with these operational risks, it's a lot harder to actually get the tool populated because it's unique to the organisation, a lot of the controls, whereas from a financial perspective we've bought it off and they already had the controls and the risks and all that sort of stuff pre-populated. escalated. So I think that that's probably the missing link in the sense that anything that goes through the internal controls from a financial perspective, we would have an action plan, and in the information report, that's where we've actually had those action plans to sit there and say, actually, to bring that back up to effective, then we'll actually bring that back within our appetite. These are the things that we need to do. So that's just probably the missing step in this, from this perspective.
So it sounds like it will be possible to get it back within risk appetite.
And I think it's hard, like a lot of people, trying to find the perfect risk system for your operational and strategic risks, and they end up spending so much time and resources on trying to, keep it up to date, when sometimes it's better just to have it laid out, and the fact that, it's on it's on one page, you can see it easily, council members can have it in front of them. I don't think, it's also a good way to focus on it, to see, what's going on. Sorry, Sharon.
And I'll just add as well, from a strategic risk perspective, there is probably 50 operational risks that essentially, and with this sort of stuff, it actually rolls up to that strategic risk as well, as to sit there and say, so doing those assessments on the effectiveness of all the operational risks, because realistically it's probably one or two operational risks that we will sit there and say aren't good enough, which is actually causing that partial effectiveness. That's the volume, because realistically this is a lot. And yeah, it's just getting into those level of operational risks, and especially with the heritage, in our last assessment we've actually split them out. So I think you might recall last time we had heritage and environment and all that sort of stuff all lumped together, whereas now we've sort of separated them out as well. So.
Any other questions or comments then?
I was wondering if we talk about the WHS risk, and just specifically the residual risk. I see after these controls, we've got it to a possible likelihood and a minor consequence, which gives us a low risk rating. But do we think that consequence is truly minor? And I'm drawn back to our session that we had, that information session, where we talked about some of the higher risk activities the council undertake because of, and can't avoid, right? And I think it was tree limb management and stuff like that. And so I understand we've got a set of controls, we've got procedures in place to minimise any risk, and so that I think reduces the likelihood of it. But I think if you've got those sort of activities happening, are we looking at only a minor outcome if it does occur?
Look, the work health safety, I'm spending a lot of my time in that area. So say with tree lopping, for an example, yes, you may have an incident with tree lopping, but that's why we've got massive maintenance plans on all our EWPs, independent servicing, all the guys do training, reassessment,
is if everyone just followed their swims and their training, etc., everyone goes home the way they rock up to work, and that's what we strive to do. We get complacent if we do our internal audits and we still don't identify the employee or contractor that rolls in a little bit tired and makes that split decision mistake. But we do identify that in our cause and effects, and we identify them. But it would be remiss of us not to say that you are guaranteed on a high risk role, you are guaranteed that nothing happens to you, which is the mentality of safety and is everyone's responsibility. But the swims, the documentation and the like, unfortunately we need it as organisations, but it comes into play after an incident where we then turn around and say we've done everything we had to. It was the person that's now in the hospital bed. It's fault. It's a sad series of events that we're there, but that's why I think we do need to identify the fact that we're never going to be perfect because of the industry that we operate in.
Yeah. Human error, unfortunately.
It's not something you can ever do.
We can't phase it out. We're human. We can't operate as a robot. But we've tried to implement processes, safe act observations, so we actually watch the guys do the job. Someone else is watching them. Are you actually following the JSA or safe work method statement like you said you would? If you're not, why? Is there an issue with it? Let's improve it. Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay, so I'm happy with that. The other one is cybersecurity.
Yeah.
And just given the massive changes in the industry, and I see we've got it to a low, right? I'm just wondering if you could have a discussion about that.
Are we essential aid yet? Sorry. Essential aid, are we?
Yes.
Yeah, we are. Yep.
So I think it's essentially the same philosophy from a work health and safety perspective. We know that there's all we know that if it happens to sit there and say, and we have an unprotected environment, we are the consequences are actually high. But again, we have that many controls in place because we actually recognise that threat, and we're actually quite proactive in recognising and keeping up to date with those threats. And yes, we do the essential way, and we have those assessments. We do regular penetration checks and all that sort of stuff as well. So it is that thing about to sit there and say yes, it possible could happen, but with all the technology and the belts and braces that we actually have in place, we believe that we continually update and all that sort of stuff, and that's part of our so we do have some insurance that we take out for cyber attacks, but one of the criteria of that for that insurance to be valid is that we have to continually patch, so we cannot get behind on any of our patching. So there's a whole heap of there's this massive framework underneath that sits there and says we know what happens, and we're just literally whatever we need to do, we do, sometimes to the detriment of sometimes doing work, but it is that trade-off of that risk. The same scenario, we're comfortable that all the things that we have in place, our update regime, our patches, our keeping up to date, and doing those assessments, especially when we do a major system change or something like that, so we do those penetrations to those checks and balances to make sure that it is as safe as it can be for the current threats that we know. But I would sit there and say that the amount of attacks that we have on a daily basis is absolutely phenomenal, but we haven't had any breach, because of the things that we actually have in place from a cyber attack. I will not put a hand on heart that one won't get through, but it will probably be something that's so new from an industry perspective as well. So.
And I think also with the essential aid being the the standard of the level that we go to that's working for the organisation. The next step up is to be like ISO certified 27,000, and it's just a whole IT arm, etc., that you would have to employ and maintain. It's a beast within itself. The one thing that I would love to see in the Essential 8 though is actually auditors be invented in the space, because at this point in time the Essential 8 is the recommendation of the things we need to be doing, and then we develop our own internal auditors and whatever else, but a certified external auditor to come in and assist, to be able to provide, I know I've spoken to about it before where it's auditing, but I think that particular piece would actually help with any trying not to be compliant but not with any malice. Like, you know, the person that thought they were doing the right thing, but something changed in the industry and they didn't, they weren't aware of it.
And I think you can get, that's, you know, it's a really good idea to, you know, to get an external consultant in that's sort of, you know, on the curve and knows what's going on. But then also, as Sharon said before, sort of keeping in mind that, you know, there's sort of that, you know, bang versus buck, and that you can have I've had it with another organisation that you have an IT or a cyber review done, they come up with 30 recommendations, and to implement those recommendations would be very costly process. So you need to work out what you know, what risk are you willing to
Just
bear,
be practical, yeah.
because you can't make it completely risk-free.
We're quite fortunate in local government with local government risk services. They actually do a lot of that investment as well, and they actually, as part of our membership with that, we do actually get the opportunity to actually engage or get services, like they have contracts with Cyber CX and all that sort of stuff, which we can access as well. And when something comes up, we actually do utilise those services from a local government risk services perspective, because obviously the way that we're insured, they want to make sure that every council is actually doing everything that they can to actually minimise the threat or the impact that they actually have if something happens as well. So I think I suppose that's a bit of a fortunate position for us as a local government, as a sector, that we actually do have that access through local government risk services, and that they're quite high on this particular area as well as work health and safety. And
Any other questions or comments? No.
Not to do with this anymore, but going back to the enterprise risk management framework. I see page 125 has the roles and responsibilities for the audit and risk committee. So good to know that. And I think, are we going to talk about the BCP?
Yeah. Yep.
I think that it looks really good, right? It's a very modern implementation. I saw you've got your essential practices or essential functions, and they look pretty good. But I saw the governance function was on there with a 1-day turnaround time, which I can find it for you like.
Yep.
So that's page 186. So this is like the appendix to the BCP that outlines the different functions, right? So payroll's on there, obviously very important, you know, and then it's the governance agendas and stuff has a max acceptable outage of 1 day.
Yes, so I work with Susie, so it depends when the agenda's going out. So the same as payroll, if the payroll system goes down 1 day before payroll, we got 1 day to fix it. If the payroll system goes down the day after payroll, we're not paying people for another 10 days. So the same thing goes for governance. It literally depends the time the system goes down. Sorry, Susie, I was just jumping in. But it's the same, it's because there's cycles, it literally just happens to depend when it goes down. So you'd be on Murphy's Law. It probably would
and again, I was just going to reiterate it. I suppose it's always when we have an outage, and depending on the, you know, obviously the application of the business continuity plan also depends on the severity of the business interruption event. And having experienced a business interruption event which was a major vandalism attack and all that sort of stuff, some of these deadlines do sort of go out the window. And I think that it's just, we just need to be cognizant of that as well. And again, it's that risk assessment to sit there and say, okay, if we had a major business continuity event that we knew that we weren't going to be able to get up and running, irrespective of council agendas, we wouldn't worry about, you know, realistically, we wouldn't worry about the fact that we're not going to comply with legislation because the building's burnt down.
Yep.
You know, so I think it's always that difficult thing when you create the sub-plan, because that critical thing for governance is actually probably created that sub-plan is in isolation of a big wider event, which is most instances what actually happens in a business continuity plan. You know, if it was a business continuity issue about the fact that our business system wasn't available, that's a different thing to a business continuity event where we really would have to activate the plan.
Yep.
I think that's where you read it in that context.
And yeah, I understand that, right? And yeah, so I understand there's a critical function, but I guess if you do have a incident and there is a bit of a slowdown in communications, people are going to look at this document and say, in the absence of anything else, I'm going to roll with what's listed here. And if the governance function is listed at 1 day and many other things listed at 2, 3, you know, payroll's 3 days, we'll have the IT team spending their time fixing the governance portion before they even start on the payroll portion, right?
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of that priority level. I don't know, it does list the critical functions with numbers. I don't know if that's the priority level or if they're actually just running from the max scheduled outage. But I guess that's the only feedback that I would give, is that seemed a bit out to me compared to the outage available for other functions. If I can make one more comment. In the IT one, on page 187, it lists functional dependencies, right, which are things that IT function relies on, and it lists the cemeteries there. Which I was, thought was a bit, they talk about ghosts and machines. And
We're waiting for a reply.
No, that's definitely a error. I'll fix that up. This has been a complete rebuild of BCP. It's not a template. It's a complete rebuild, and I use a template to create one to make it look, and then I use that to then create all the sub-plans, and obviously one dot point got, yeah.
It's a good quick update. No, we're just making sure that you review.
the other one that jumped out
Good
to me
plan.
It's usually Christina picks it up, but you're learning fast.
is page 158. The actual, the shortest acceptable outage we've listed in this document is the library customer services with 3 hours.
So it's probably the way that it's communicated. That is customer communication with the residents. So if there's a fire or a major flood or something like that, we can't lose our connection with the community, because they ring council wanting advice. They don't look at SES very often, they don't look at MFS, they don't look at anything. They will go, there's water in my back door, I think it's the door
drive home, no, the river's flooded, you can't get that way, or, you know, who's going to face the press, you know, because, you know, a tree's fallen on the CEO, like, you know, it's just, you have to, it's amazing what you don't think of. You think, oh, you know, how hard could it be? But this can be quite fun, because it's all make believe.
I just got a random image in my head. I roll into the office, things are on fire. There's just there's all these plants thrown around. What happened here?
You see here. It's all down the office.
Construction. Yeah.
Cool, alright, so we've got the officer's recommendation that we recommend to council that they adopt the risk management framework, adopt the strategic risk register, adopt the draft business continuity plan. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Christine, all in favour? Carry unanimously. Alright, going on to item 7, which is the information reports. So first of all, we've got the 7.1, which is the internal controls review. Sharon, did you want to talk, or Erin?
Erin can talk.
Who wants this one?
Erin can do it.
Okay, so we just, with the internal controls this year, so this is a review of all of our financial internal controls that we do once a year using the control track software, which is the data practice model used by most of the councils in local government. We did this at the same time that we had Amy Road come in and do our interim audit as well, where they assess all of our internal controls. So we haven't got that report back yet, but I can't imagine that it's going to be too different from what we have scored ourselves, because they didn't come back with anything at the time saying otherwise. Our overall assessment and average score was 4.7 out of 5, which was fantastic, and we've got five tasks. So anything that is rated a 3 or below will generate a task at the end. So we've got a few things that we still need to address before the end of this financial year. So I'll take this report as read if there's any other questions, or if Sharon wants to add to this one.
I'll just add that some of the improvement plans that have been identified, some of them have already been addressed. Like, so for example, the review found that way more people had access to rates entry, so that's actually been rectified. So even though we had 5, I think probably 2 or 3 of them have already been actioned as a result of doing the review, which is always a good thing of why we actually do those reviews, because it's some things that we just take for granted as we go until we start looking at these sorts of things. So that's all I've got to add.
Are there any questions or comments on that? Yeah.
What jumped out to me was that 3 out of 5 is actually effective, right?
Partially effective.
Partially effective. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. And the system generates that. So it's a system, like, so the product is the one that's defined that for partially effective controls, that's when you actually need to have an improvement plan.
Yeah. So what stands out here obviously is the financial governance portion. Are you able to describe what those controls relate to?
Can you just direct me to what page you're looking
Yeah, page 202. So basically, the only portion of, or the only category of controls that rated below 4 was the financial governance portion. That's 3.5 out of 5.
Is that due to the policies? I think it's the same as last year.
Yeah.
Until the policies get reviewed and signed off.
Yeah.
But as we know, it's in progress, so
Yeah.
we got comfort last year. It's a work in progress.
We can take that on notice as to sit there and say what the controls are, because
It's in the attachment.
yeah, it's just easily added. Yeah, in attachment 2.
I see, sorry, so there's a, just looking at that attachment now, right, so column 1, 2, 3, 4, that little number there, is that the pre-assessment and then the
Post.
yeah, I see, yep.
Yeah, so essentially what it actually goes in, so the scoring based on the actual reviewer, so the process owner will do their assessment, and then the reviewer, based on the information that's provided or for that assessment, may change the assessment as well. So that's why you'll actually see those differences. And then when, depending on what the reviewer's assessment is, as to whether it determines that there is actually a improvement plan required or not.
So the good thing about this is that there's that historical data as well, so from 2020 to show kind of the improvement, and as Sharon said, to do the double check as well, just to make sure things that we thought were implemented are still implemented. It's a pretty robust process. Cool. All right. Management. I don't know yet. The officer's recommendation is that we note the FY26 internal controls review report. I've got a mover. Christine, seconder. Lesh Hanks, all in favour, carried unanimously. All right. The next one is the internal audit update. Judy?
Yes, through the report, through the chair. Is a shorter report. I'll just take it as being read and happy to take any comments or information.
Lesh Hanks?
A quick question, just probably going back to item 6.1, the review, where in the audit scope we're talking about if we can test capitalising and timing of costs. That is exactly the same topic where we've identified that actually this potentially could be done better, which is what we're picking up in the quarterly review, and now we're just trying to get that scoping of how we can improve. Yep. Okay.
One quick comment. So a couple of papers ago, we talked about an operating initiative that was dropped due to budget concerns, which was talking about the strategic asset management, the implementation of the strategic asset management system. Are we going to consider if, as part of this, how that can help and if that's still warranted?
Yes. So I think that so this was probably a piece of work that probably should have been done before that was actually implemented, to actually understand, I suppose, where at risk and what we actually needed to do. I think that's it's always the case with regard to engineering do their asset management one way and finance do their asset management the other way, another way. And I understand that there's ultimately two different goals, but there's that point where they do cross over, and it's actually that crossover that I will sit there and say I have felt uncomfortable with over the last couple of years, and it is just trying to really get to the nuts and bolts of that. And when once we actually understand that crossover, then we can actually work out what the system is from that perspective, because I think that it has always been, from an asset management perspective in the past, it's always been that engineering asset management, and finance do whatever finance need to do. Whereas the philosophy is to sit there and say we have to actually work together, and what we do, and it's actually what you do drives what we have, not the other way around, or they're not actually independent of each other. So it's just making sure that we're aware that they're actually wedded together, and where the gaps are to actually make sure that they are wedded together. There's simple things. There's to sit there and say, what's the indexation rate? It's like, oh, well, you tell me what the indexation rate is, or, I'll just use this indexation rate. It's like, well, what's the justification of that? What's the basis of that? Oh, it's just a number, so it's just making sure that we do that. And also, which I think it also stems from probably a historical thing about not having asset management plans and then not actually understanding those implications of, and the condition assessments. And, you know, when you do the condition assessments, we also have to have a valuation process, and because a lot of our assets don't have that ready market where we can do an easy valuation, when you're doing that condition assessment, you should actually be making sure that you're doing that independent valuation of what the replacement cost is at the same time. So I think that there's just been a bit like, yes, we've done condition assessments, but they haven't actually done that next step. So it's just some of those, I suppose, that bit more maturity of the system as we're going along, and making sure then we've got an asset management system that meets both the financial needs and also the asset management needs as well going forward.
Any other questions or comments? No? Good. All right, so the office's recommendation is that we note the internal audit update report. I've got a mover and seconder, Christine, all in favour, carrying nervously. All right, the next item is the Gawler River Flood Management Authority draft budget. I've got a this area.
So this is a pretty basic report. So all of these numbers are already built into our draft budget. So there are two components to the Gawler River Floodplain Management Authority budget. So council will be contributing 69,000 next year towards, I think that's the study. I probably should check that. So
The debt, looking at the debt.
yeah.
Yeah, the business
Yeah,
case stuff.
So that's a cash component which is built into the budget. And then we have our operating share. So we'll have our operating share and our equity share. So which I think is about 17.39%, what it was last year. So sometimes it tweaks a little bit from year to year. So they're looking at a operating loss of 996,000, and so our share of that would be 171,000. So that will hit our operating statement for next financial year. So I'm happy to take that as read or take any questions.
Just in relation to that, so just in, like, I know that it's doing an operating loss. However, the position of the authority is that essentially it doesn't cover the depreciation, like it doesn't recover the depreciation costs of the dam from the constituent councils. So obviously whenever, so they'll come back if they need to do a capital contribution, if they actually need to do any major works. However, obviously the nature of the asset, most of that sort of work is actually being sought through federal and state funding from that perspective. So that's hence why they're always operating at a loss, because they don't recover that depreciation cost from us through those service charges. We just basically pay whatever operating costs, we make a contribution to whatever operating costs they actually have for the year, and most of them at this point in time is that contribution to the business case.
And just probably be good just to say the conversations we're also having with the Planning Minister, Nick Champion as well, just around what the GMFRA can do, but then also what they can't do as well, because it is a beast in itself on a problem that's only going to evolve as more houses and more hardscaping comes in on that river network. And I think that's been acknowledged. What the model looks like moving forward is probably the conversation that we're having, and I think it is going to be potentially we'll receive a lot of education when we are finished of the dam side of things, but I think that's a small piece of the puzzle here, and I think other levels of government might look at what the future model is and what skin in the game they have over the constituent councils, for the better, I think, personally.
Thanks for that.
short answer is yes. That was part of, that was, in all seriousness, that was part of business case to go to government to seek funding for this study. I'll just chime in, Mayor Shanks has said that I feel that once this study is complete, the cost of the works is going to be such a magnitude that all the councils will come together and advocate to the state, and the state take it over. Because it's acknowledged that none of these councils, singly or collectively, have the ability to fund the magnitude that we require for the capital expense. That's going to be needed to bring it up to the standard that's required for this 1 in 100, and particularly if they look to raise it as well.
Because they're talking, there's a number here, you're saying it's higher than that.
Sorry, what page is it on?
There on page 247 is a rough figure. And yeah, I agree with your assessment, right? That it's
Works, the capital works is in excess of what councils could do with.
Yeah.
Well, 227 million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw that.
Yeah.
That's all on the wall, yeah.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but your question was going to the 1 in 100 year is an upgrade of what?
Yeah.
So what are we at currently, and what are we upgrading to for 227 million?
It's a 10-metre raise.
Yeah, but I think the answer, like a shoot from the hip example, is currently we can deal with a 1 in 25 year flood, and anything above that, we're stuck up.
Yeah. What's interesting in this modelling scenario is that with the growth that's going to occur that hasn't been built yet, there's increased runoff that's going to occur as a result of that.
Yeah.
So the current modelling probably is already behind. They've done some modelling as well at Concordia, but it's going to be a moving feast, I think. Yeah, thanks for receiving that.
Yeah, I think, yeah, because important to keep discussions with state government and then federally, you see what happens in the 1 in 100 year flood in Queensland, like it's declared an emergency and, disaster or whatever, so yeah, it's good to keep the communication lines open. Alright, we've got an officer's recommendation that we note the Gawler River Flood Management Authority draft annual business plan and draft budget. Do I have a mover? Mayor Shanks, a seconder. Christine, all in favour, carried unanimously. Alright, 7.4 is the governance and compliance update for Q3. Lucy, do you want to speak to this one?
Yes, through the chair. This is the first iteration of a new sort of reporting template to make it more of that sort of checklist style, commenting on sort of, yes, we're meeting at compliance sort of rates, what has been delivered, any reasons for any sort of anomalies or blips or occurrences, like I noted the information briefing sessions. I really tried to drill down, but there's still a little bit of finessing I think that can occur, but it's that first iteration of giving them more of that traffic light, quick snapshot overview of where things are at and some of those key, but trying to tease out what the evidence is to attribute to the comments of compliance or non-compliance or in progress and pending. I'm happy to take questions, but yes, we'll continue to refine this, I guess, each quarter to sort of get it, as a good reporting document and tool as it can be. Probably having a new Ursula on board during
recommendation that we receive a note governance compliance update for Q3 FY26. Do I have a mover? Councillor Lana. Seconder. Mayor Shanks, all in favour, carried unanimously. All right, item 8 is items listed for discussion, which were none. Item 9 is questions without notice, which were none. And item 10 is motions without notice, which there aren't any. Oh, you do have one, sorry. Go.
Thank you, Chair. Look, this one is pretty self-explanatory, but I think it would be remiss of us not to acknowledge the time that yourself and Christine have spent on our audit and risk, and we'd really like to thank you from the council for the hard work. And it's been really, on a personal level, it's been really handy to have you guys in the background and watching the evolution and picking up and noticing the change. It does provide us a little bit of confidence when we are making decisions. You'll be sorely missed. Both of you leaving at the same time is one of the ones where we went, we didn't feel like we managed that properly because that overlap we're losing, but I do know we're in capable hands with our other independent men, and I wish you well with your endeavours, and once again thank you very much from the elected body and also the organisation, I'm sure.
Thank you. Christine, did you want to say anything? Without notice?
Just to confirm that it has been good to see the improvement. I think I've been on this committee maybe 3.5 years, and it certainly has improved a lot. And I actually had another audit committee meeting yesterday, and both this one and the other one 250 pages each, and this one I could read a lot faster because the questions were answered, and it was just a much easier read, which indicates that they've got things under control.